How do we know when it's time to break up? I feel like this is something that a lot of us have a really, really hard time with. I know I have a hard time with it. I've also seen other autistic friends struggle with this. And I've also seen a lot of you guys struggle with this as well. And I think a lot of it does have to do with our neurodivergence. I feel like it's hard to tell when it's not working for you because we grow so used to existing in compromise, if that makes sense. So it's very common for us to adjust ourselves to other people, to life, let alone our partners, in order to make things work. Because that is such a baseline to our experience, it's hard to then have that perspective of, I wonder at what point is this not working for me anymore? Because for the most part, a lot of the times our life just feels uncomfortable all around. It's hard for autistic people to enter relationships where we are fully seen, fully met in the ways that we are expected to meet other people. Because of that experience, it makes it hard for us to tell when it's time to break up because we get so used to accommodating other people that it's hard for us to tell when something is just not working and we need to make that hard decision to move on with our lives and go separate ways. Okay, so the first thing on this list is, do you feel consistently judged by your person despite your sincere efforts to show who you are to them and explain who you are, why you do what you do to them? And this honestly is just such a slow killer of the relationship itself, but also just who you are as a person when you have to constantly do things knowing that your person is not going to understand it and knowing that you're going to have to explain it to them. Also knowing that they're probably not going to actually listen to you and try to understand. And it feels like a losing battle before you even get into it. I feel like when you're autistic and you're in a relationship with someone, for the most part, you should reach a point where you can just simply exist and do things with the inherent knowing that they will understand it without an explanation. And that's the thing is, us as autistic folks will always have to explain ourselves to others for the rest of our lives. So that is more of a reason to make sure that the person you're with is the one person you don't have to do that with. It's one thing to talk about yourself and why you made your certain decisions and explore that concept with your person. You're externally processing with them. That's completely different than they will not understand unless I have to go through the trouble of explaining why I did everything I did to them. And a good way to gauge this is whether or not you feel like you're needing to justify yourself to them or convince them of your truth. When you start to feel like there's labor involved in bridging the gap between you and your person and that understanding, that's usually not a good sign. You shouldn't have to explain to your partner why you're having a hard time at the new workplace because everyone in the new workplace is very extroverted and they seem to dislike you right away because you're more quiet, things like that. That's something that they should be learning about in the beginning stages of you guys getting to know each other, but eventually something they just inherently know about you. And so the conversation after a certain amount of getting to know each other should shift more from this is how my life tends to play out over to how do I feel about my life playing out like this? Does that make sense? Okay, so the next thing on this list is that when processing your person's emotions or traumas or whatever they're going through in life is actively taking you away from being able to process your own emotions and what's going on in your life. This one's really important because a part of being in a partnership with someone is having to constantly find the balance between your own autonomy as a person, their own autonomy as a person, and how can you guys both have a healthy amount of interdependence and co-regulation without slipping into the realm of codependence, right? I think there's moments where when you're having a bad day, it's not wrong to lean on your person and have them comfort you or regulate with you it's not wrong to, on bad days, have your person remind you of who you are, why you're so strong, and why you're so appreciated, and why you're so loved. But when things start to slip into the realm of you have less capacity to process your own emotions, you start to let aspects of your relationship with yourself get neglected because you're so busy regulating your person for them, making sure they're okay, making sure they're doing what they need to do to be on top of things, making sure that you remind them of this and that, you're teaching them certain things. That's when you can know that things are out of balance and it's not something you could necessarily fix. Because again, in order to fix that problem, in order to fix that imbalance, you would have to teach them. And in order to teach them, they would have to be able to learn. For them to be able to learn, you have to get them to a place where they're able to take that information in and integrate it. Again, that's more labor. And so there's a certain baseline I feel like you and your person needs to have before entering a relationship so that you're not the source to their purpose, their regulation, their lessons. Those are things that they should have a good handle on their own. And you're just there as a supplement to that journey, right? You're on a journey, they're on a journey. And for whatever reason, you guys chose to take that journey together. And it should be something you're sharing together rather than you being the source of their journey. And the hard truth is that when you're autistic and you are in a relationship with someone, oftentimes that sense of loyalty is so strong because we don't necessarily choose our people lightly. We oftentimes don't have many people in our life because we just don't have the capacity for that. And so when we have that one person, we really do pour a lot into them. And it's not because we have to, it's because we genuinely want to. And I feel like that's such a beautiful attribute to have, but I feel like because you're this type of person and you could have that tendency, you have to be very, very mindful of when things start to slip into you taking on other people's baggage and work on their behalf, and you're putting in more work than they are in processing it and keeping it on track. Because another part of being autistic is that you're just simply not going to have as much capacity to exist as other people. And so when you're doing all that work for a whole other human, you're going to hit a breaking point where you're not going to be able to handle your own stuff. An autistic person might have less capacity to see friends. They may have less capacity to pour into school and work. They may have less capacity to pour into their own personal hygiene and self-care. They may have less capacity to pour into their own journey, passions, things like that. These are all the ways that you could kind of tell, I'm not taking care of myself. Why? It's usually because you're pouring so much into the other person and they're benefiting from it. I'm not saying they're doing this maliciously, right? Oftentimes humans aren't that conniving, but it's just a result of that codependence developing where they get to enjoy their life because you're doing all of the work underneath the surface for them. When they have a bad day, you regulate their emotions for them. They never have to figure out what it means to regulate themselves or dig deep and figure out why they're dysregulated in the first place because you're doing all of it for them. You're talking at them, you're comforting them, and they're just like, okay, cool, thanks. And then they move on. Don't take other people's growth away from them just because you're willing to take it on for them. That's not right for you or for them. So the next thing on this list is when you start to care about your person more than they care about themselves. Usually I see two different things happening when it comes to our partners. You either get a person that genuinely wants to be autonomous and do their own thing and process their own baggage, but the autistic person is consistently trying to take on that baggage for them. And they're like pushing you away and they're like, please just let me handle this on my own. This is my thing. This is my journey. And then there's the other person that doesn't mind you taking that on and they'll happily let you take it on. But regardless, when you end up being with someone who just simply doesn't care about themselves, and you find yourself advocating for them more than they will ever stand up for themselves or advocate for themselves, there's an issue there. And I'm not talking about defensiveness, right? Because defensiveness can look like advocating for yourself, like, no, I'm doing good, I'm such a good person. Defensiveness is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when someone has an unhealthy behavior, for example, on a bad day, they cope by self-harming behaviors that don't serve them, don't serve their relationships, don't serve who they want to be, don't serve their career. It's self-sabotaging, but they don't care about themselves enough to introspect on, why am I doing this? Why do I keep doing this? Where did this come from? And how can I do something about that? Let me give this new thing a try tomorrow and see if this helps break me out of this pattern. Let me take initiative. Let me figure this out, because I deserve a healthier life. I deserve to be someone I could look up to and be proud of, because I could show up in my relationships and in my life in ways that I feel proud of. If your person isn't able to have enough self-love to speak to themselves in that way, and you have to be the one that's like, you deserve to get better, you deserve to improve, you deserve to develop healthier behavior patterns that allows you to feel good about yourself and show up in your relationships, and you find your person being like, oh no, why are you saying this? Why do you keep believing in me? Why don't you just leave me? I know it's so easy to get stuck in that pattern, because you're like wanting to shake them and convince them, you're worth it, you could do better. I believe in you. Let's try something else. Like, don't get stuck in that hole. Again, there's supposed to be a certain baseline that people should meet before they enter a relationship. And when you find yourself caring about someone more than they care about themselves, that's not a good sign, right? And that isn't to say you can't struggle with self-love, because we all struggle with self-love. And I think that's why a lot of us stay in relationships despite us caring about them more than they care about themselves. It's because we know what it feels like to not like ourselves and to be so critical and to feel so hopeless and depressed. But you have to understand, your willingness to be their cheerleader will not make a difference if they cannot be their own cheerleader. Because at the end of the day, if they don't even know what it feels like to be their own cheerleader, they're not going to understand the full capacity of what your love and what you standing in their corner is supposed to mean and feel like. You know what I'm saying? No matter what you do and how much you pour into this person, it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to matter. If anything, you're just enabling them. Okay, so the next thing on this list is when your person's expectations of you and how you should show up for them and the relationship actually either holds you back from your own growth, or it pulls you further and further away from who you actually are. So this one comes down to compatibility. I love talking about compatibility when it comes to relationships, because compatibility is such a beautiful, yummy, nuanced topic of getting two different people meshing together in a way that works. And it's like this beautiful dance. When you get two compatible people, you don't need them to be similar in order for them to be compatible. The beauty of compatibility is that you just exist as you are, they exist as they are, and that experience only brings you closer and closer to your person. And you don't even have to force it or put effort into it for it to just work. Whereas when you get two people who are not compatible, it takes so much work and so much out of both people in order to just meet the bare minimum of what a relationship consists of. And you feel your spirit get drained over the years, and it's just, it feels like a disease. You're living with the disease, right? And again, when I say that, I'm not necessarily trying to villainize either person. It's just, you're not compatible. The issue isn't that we are unable to care for, accommodate our person, and to show them love through acts of service. The problem is that when our acts of service starts to pull us further and further away from ourselves. So for example, if your partner needs to have small talk every day and you happily accommodate them every single time they come back from work, you small talk with them for an hour, but you start to realize that after small talking, you feel extremely drained, you feel almost shut down, you feel numb, and you don't really know why, but that's a good example of you accommodating another person while that accommodation is actively taking away from your well-being and your own preferences, right? A compatible partnership would look like your person wants to come home and connect with you. You want to connect with them, but you don't necessarily want to have small talk. So maybe you guys find nonverbal ways to connect. Maybe you guys go on a walk and listen to music together and you don't have to talk the whole time. So you still get to meet each other's needs, but not in a way that takes away from you guys. Whereas with the first example I gave you, meeting that person's needs is actively draining you every single time. And that takes a toll. Or for example, if your partner requires you to be able to do things for them without them needing to ask you, because them asking you for something makes them feel like you don't care and you're not paying attention. And so you're happily trying to accommodate them. What that looks like is you just observing them very closely all day. And anytime they exhale or sigh, you start to go through all the thoughts in your head of, are they upset? Are they stressed? What do I have to do to make sure that they are supported right now? Can I do this? Can I make them food? Can I bring them a cup of water? Can I help take out the trash for them? What can I do to help them feel better? The simple act of accommodating their need, of you being attuned to them in that way, is making you so much more anxious. And it's spinning you out, right? And this is something to think about when you're autistic and you might deal with a lot of burnout, a lot of shutdowns. How compatible are you actually with your partner? And how many ways are you actually sacrificing your own preferences and well-being in order to accommodate their needs and make sure they're good? Make sure that those accommodations are in alignment with you, your well-being, your values, and who you want to become. Okay, so the next thing on this list is when you find yourself wanting and needing to isolate in order to regulate. So this one's interesting because a lot of us may be used to isolating ourselves to regulate, right? But that's the thing. If that's your automatic response, and that's something you're actively trying to outgrow, then being in a partnership that actually encourages you to continue your isolation is not going to be conducive to you and the growth that you want to do. So you want to be with a partner that actually makes you feel comfortable practicing what it's like to co-regulate with another person, be supported by them, ask them for help, and have them show up for you in your moment of need. And I want you guys to keep something in mind. Are you isolating because you want to isolate, or are you isolating because your person has failed to show up for you despite your attempts to go to them when you need help, despite your attempts to ask for their support in moments where you need it, despite your attempts to lean on them, right? If you've attempted these things multiple times to be able to co-regulate with them in order to get support, and they just have not shown up, they've let you down multiple times, and if anything, maybe they blew up in your face and you were put into a position where now you're regulating them. As a result, you end up just going off on your own in your moments of suffering and just suffering in silence until you're better. And then that's when you come back to the partnership. That's a good sign that you're not in a healthy relationship, because partnership should be mutual. On your partner's bad days, are you there to support them and regulate them? And the same goes for you. When you're struggling, when you're suffering, when you're having a bad day, are they there to actually support you and show up for you in a way where you don't have to think about it, you don't have to ask for it, you don't have to get them ready to show up for you? You get to just simply deflate and fall to the ground, and they're there to catch you. When you're crying, they're there to wipe away your tears. When you need to be held, they're there to hold you. When you find yourself automatically going into isolation without even considering going to your person and asking for help as a result of being failed so many times and being shown so many times that they're unable to support you and help you, that's a good sign that you are not in an equal partnership. You're not in a healthy partnership. And likewise, the next thing on this list is that when talking is no longer a viable option and you go straight to problem solving and self-regulating by yourself. This is a huge, huge sign, because a lot of the times autistic folks can tend to think more mechanically than average people. We tend to think holistically. We tend to think in patterns, right? And so when you're a pattern recognizer, it's easy to break things apart and be like, okay, this is an issue. How do we solve it? How do we tackle this? How do we figure out how to not struggle with this anymore? All of that kind of stuff. And so whenever there's an issue that comes up, whether that's an issue with you, the issue with them, an issue with the relationship, and your response is to always go off on your own and try to figure out what to do about it on your own, or to figure out how to cope with it on your own, that's a good sign that you're not in a healthy partnership. And again, this has to be contingent to you've tried to problem solve with them. You've tried to communicate with them multiple times, but they've shown you again and again that they cannot have the conversation without being dysregulated. They cannot have the conversation without being triggered. You have to constantly think about, am I going to offend them? Are they going to be angry with me? How do I have to manage my tone so that they're not upset? How do I have to manage the way that I say the sentences so that they're not offended? You know, when you have to start to think about all these ways to manage their emotional response and their capacity to have that conversation and their ability to problem solve with you and follow through, and you ultimately arrive at the conclusion of, I can't do that with them because even though I've tried, it blows up in my face and they're unable to follow through, and it just creates tension. And all that happens is that they just feel even worse and the problem is still there. So as the autistic person, when you start to find yourself coping with all these issues on your own and not bringing it up to your person and simply just talking about it with them and problem solving with them, that's not a good sign. Partnerships are bound to have issues here and there. I don't think they're supposed to have a lot of issues, right? Ideally, you and your partner should be so compatible that you don't really have issues. And the only issues that come up are just things that happen in life and you guys have to figure it out together. But the problems don't come from you guys. It comes from life. Does that make sense? So a compatible relationship would look like you and your person are constantly able to tackle issues outside of yourselves with each other and navigate it smoothly as a team, rather than constantly feeling like you guys are at war all the time. So when you, as the autistic person, start to feel like you are trying to get on the same page and fight the fight together, but instead your person is constantly trying to fight you, and so therefore you don't want to bring anything up to them because it's just going to turn into a fight, that's a good sign you're not in a partnership. You're basically their caretaker. And to be frank, you don't have the capacity to be a caretaker to another person. You just don't. The next thing on this list is when you start to feel alone even when they're there. This one is a big one. When you're with your person, you're eating with them, you're cooking with them, you're falling asleep next to them, but for some reason you just feel more alone than if you were actually by yourself. That's a good sign that you are not being met within the relationship. You're not being seen in the relationship. You feel invisible. And the reason why this happens is oftentimes because there's incompatibility there, and also the other person is not willing to actually see you and love you for who you are. Does that make sense? So I oftentimes find that there's a lot of people who enter relationships not because they're ready, not because they want to, not because they love you, but because it's just comfortable, right? I feel like relationships is a really easy way for people to just enable their unhealthy behavior patterns and continue just being who they have been for so long. It's easy to be in a companionship and just not grow as people. And I feel like oftentimes that's what it starts to feel like for the autistic person being in that sort of partnership, is that you just feel so fucking alone, even when you're falling asleep next to that person, because they are not actually seeing you and actually processing who you are as a person outside of the relationship. Like, this is a whole other human with their own story, with their own thought processes, with their own philosophies and consciousness. And how amazing is it that we chose to be together and share our life together. Usually when you feel alone in a relationship, your person is not thinking in that perspective. It's just like you're a warm body to come home to. You're a warm body to lay in bed with, you know? And that can only do so much for us, because I feel like autistic folks oftentimes have this very, very deep need to connect and bond with our loved ones, especially our partners, on such a deep soul level, where it's like you want to be in full awareness that you are two different consciousness coming together and just sharing a life together. And I feel like sometimes what tends to happen is we're willing to do that for another person. Like, oh my God, how are they with me? How did they choose me? They're so amazing. But you're not feeling that same energy back. Little things like, if you guys are eating together and they know you really like snow peas, and they give you all the snow peas in their dish, or they're out and they know that you really like frogs and they see a little frog figurine and they decide to buy it and bring it home for you without there needing to be an occasion for it. Those are little ways that people can be in tune with you as a consciousness and appreciate you as a consciousness. And I feel like oftentimes when you feel alone in a relationship, you're not getting those little needs met. You're not feeling seen. You're not feeling appreciated. And those are things that you can't ask someone to do. I know that that's also another thing when it comes to being autistic and in a relationship. We oftentimes are so open to just asking our partners for what we need. Like, hey, can you do this for me? I would really appreciate it. Hey, can you give me words of affirmation today? I'm feeling down about myself and I could really use the words of encouragement. Autistic folks tend to be able to ask for things without automatically assuming that asking for things means that the other person doesn't care. But at the same time, I do think there's certain things you shouldn't ever have to ask for, right? You shouldn't have to ask someone to pay attention to you. You shouldn't have to ask someone to appreciate you. You shouldn't have to ask someone to just consider you every now and then. You know what I'm saying? You can ask someone for specific things, like to help take out the trash when you're feeling low on spoons. You can ask someone to help give you a hug when you're feeling dysregulated, but you shouldn't have to ask someone to just simply pay attention to you and appreciate you as a person. And I get it. Relationships are going to have ups and downs or whatever it is, where maybe you or your person is going through a lower time in their life and we can't be on top of it all the time. It's not like you have to show appreciation at such a high honeymoon capacity every day for the rest of your lives, but there should be ups and downs, not just a flat line plateaued down where you feel ignored and unseen and unappreciated, you know? Okay, so the next one on this list is when you have to be an aspect of what should have been a core sense of self for them. This would mean you would either have to be their inner voice, their inner moral compass, the protector of their own limits and boundaries. When you start to feel like you have to be the person that sets boundaries for them, or to ask them whether or not they have a boundary, when you feel like you have to be the person that is asking them why they do something and what morals do they have and are they honoring it, when you have to be that inner voice where they would not introspect if it wasn't for you asking those questions, that is not a good sign. I think to a certain extent, a really healthy, fulfilling partnership is being able to share these aspects of yourself with each other, being able to externally process together, being able to explore what your boundaries are together. I feel like when your person doesn't have those things at all, and you are the only means to having that sort of sense of self, that goes to show that your person is just not a developed person. And that is something that they need to really dig deep and figure out on their own. Because again, you're taking on an aspect of their journey for them and on their behalf. And eventually it's going to take away from yourself, your journey, your growth, your well-being, while simultaneously enabling their laziness and their comfort. So long as you're going to be their inner voice, their moral compass, and the protector of their boundaries, they're not going to ever get to a point where they're going to develop those aspects of themselves. And why would you want to do that to a person? And why would you want to do that to yourself? I've had this experience so many times. Let's say you notice that your partner is really upset and you don't know why. So you have to inquire. This is when you become the means to their introspection, because they're not going to think about it on their own. So you have to be like, hey, checking in with you. How are you doing? I noticed that you're upset. Did something happen? Are you upset because I said something or did something? And then let's say your person is just like shut down and they're like, it's nothing. Why are you asking me these questions? Just leave me alone. And it's like, oh, okay, so they don't even want to even explore why they're upset, let alone sometimes you will try to emotionally regulate them because it's like, okay, I see you're upset. You're not ready to talk. Let me help you release this emotion, regulate so that you get to a place where we could calmly talk about it. Let's say an hour or two passes, they feel good, and then you talk about it with them, and then you're like, hey, what about me sitting down when we came home upset you so much? And they were to say something like, well, because when we got home, I immediately was doing all these chores, and to see you sitting on the couch upsets me because it makes me feel like I'm doing everything on my own. And so now you have to try to develop a boundary on their behalf for them and get them to be able to ask for certain things so that their boundaries aren't crossed by you in the future. You see where I'm going with this? It's so exhausting to have to be someone else's inner voice, to be someone else's means of developing their own boundaries, to be the person who has to get them to realize that they had boundaries that were crossed and how to honor their boundaries in the future. If you find yourself needing to do this on their behalf, do not. It's time to leave. That's not someone you could healthily be in a relationship with without that taking a huge toll on your mental health and your physical health and just your life in general. You should be with someone who's able to say, hey, when we came home, I'm the type of person that usually likes to use that momentum to do a bunch of chores and then relax. For some reason, I feel really upset when I see you come home and sit on the couch and relax. I know that's not your fault. I know me being upset isn't because you did something wrong, but I just know that I got upset. I think it's because when I was a kid, every time I sat down and tried to relax, my parents used to yell at me. And so now I hold myself to this standard. And when I see someone else like you not holding themselves to the standard, I get upset with you. And so I feel like I'm projecting my own expectations onto you, which makes me think, are these expectations actually my own expectations, or are they my parents' expectations that I'm continually living up to in this part of my life? And do I want to keep doing that? You know, your person should be able to have that inner dialogue on their own, and you as their partner should be someone they could share that with, right? So when you're sharing that with your person, it's very different because it's like you're able to talk about that stuff without demonizing each other and fighting each other. It's just like you're sharing your own experience and emotional responses with them, and you're externally processing it with them. And that actually brings you closer together because it allows you to understand each other better, but it allows you to understand yourself better. If your person can't even do that, they don't have the ability to do that, let alone do it with you, it's not your job to teach that to them. That's something that you truly, truly have to do on your own. And at the end of the day, if you're willing to learn these skill sets and apply it for yourself, your well-being, they should be able to do the same for themselves. Because at the end of the day, you being able to do that for yourself is not for anyone else other than you wanting to show up for yourself, which kind of goes back to one of the characteristics that I listed earlier. You have to be willing to love yourself, and your person has to be willing to love themselves. You have to be willing to take care of yourself. They have to be willing to take care of themselves. And it will never work if you love them more than they love themselves, or they love you more than you love yourself, you know? Again, it's different when you remind each other why you love each other. And it's okay to feel good, to be loved and reminded of why you're loved. But it's just very, very different when the only way that you could feel loved is when someone else is loving you, and when the only way they could feel loved is when you're loving them. Because as you will know, it's never enough. And that's the paradox of what it's like to not love yourself, is you're literally an empty pit that can never be filled. And if you've been this person or you've been with this person, you will know what it's like when you're pouring so much into the other person, so much love, so much unconditional love, and they still feel empty. They still are just floating around in their life with no sense of purpose or initiative or anything. It's just this emptiness, and they're looking for more, and they're always dissatisfied, and they're always upset, you know? The last thing on this list is you find yourself mourning the loss of your person and the relationship before there's even a breakup. If that ain't a sign, I don't know what is going to be a sign to you. If that ain't a sign, if you find yourself thinking about who this person used to be when you guys first met, the things that they used to be able to do, the things that you guys did together that you no longer did or haven't done for a long time, the aspects of them they've lost or the potential of them that they've never tapped into, and what things could be like if they were different, and what things could be like if they put in the effort, what things could be like if they were to listen and change and grow. And you realize that despite all of these what ifs or how things could be, the reality of where you guys are at now and who they are in that moment is not the reality, and you're mourning that and you're grieving it and you're just, you know what I'm saying? That's a good sign that the relationship is already over. It's just you're having a hard time realizing it and acting on that, you know? Those are all of the ways that you could tell when it's time to break up, when it's time to move on from the relationship. I know it's really hard to get to a point to realize this. I feel like this part is oftentimes the most difficult part of breakups for autistic folks, because I find that once we've made our decision, the follow through is weirdly easier because it's objective. It's like once we know exactly how things need to play out and what we have to do, you could kind of turn things off and compartmentalize enough to just do what you need to do. Move out, get your life started on your own, get routine started, all that kind of stuff. In a weird way, having things to do helps you deal and cope with the emotions and the loss better. But oftentimes when you're still in that relationship and you still love the person, you're still intertwined, and you're just trying to figure out whether to keep going, whether to keep accommodating, problem solving, or to just cut things off now because there's nothing that can be done. That's the hardest part. And I think it's hard because we're problem solving on our own. You see, that goes back to one of the things on the list, right? You're problem solving things on your own, and you've hit a dead end because you've realized the problem can only be solved when two people are involved. And you can hold up your end of the deal, but that doesn't mean they're holding up their end of the deal. And that's the thing. You could be willing to put in all this effort in doing what you need to do to make the relationship work, but if they're not meeting you in the middle, the relationship will still fail. And there's nothing you could do to convince them otherwise, and to convince them to put in that effort. There's nothing you could do to put in that effort on their behalf so that you're doing your half and their half. It's just not possible. A relationship takes two people working together. And if the other person is simply not working with you, it's going to fail. It's not going to work. And oftentimes people will stay in relationships that are failing and not working out of comfort. So if you resonated with this video and you're in this position or have been or will be, just keep these things in mind. Sometimes you could still very much love a person and still want to put effort in them, but that doesn't mean the relationship is going to work and will ever work. Sometimes the hard decision is going to be leaving the person and cutting them off, even when you still love them so much, and even when you're still willing to put in that effort. But yes, you guys, that's the end of today's video. I hope it's been helpful for you. Please stay tuned for the other videos that I'm going to be releasing this week. And if you're going through a breakup right now, my heart goes out to you because, man, it's hard. If you're someone who's in a relationship that you're not happy with, and you found yourself relating to a lot of these things that I've talked about today, it seems like you have a decision ahead of you. And I am gonna send you all of my positive energy and strength so that you can make the decision you need to, just to honor yourself and what you deserve. I know that decision is really hard to make, but I believe in you. I think you could do it. And just be patient with yourself. You don't have to make that decision overnight. If that's something that you have to think on a lot of times over and over again, then you deserve to do that. It's better to make a decision feeling good about it than to push yourself to make a decision before you're ready, if that makes sense. But anyways, you guys, make sure you take some time to drink water today. Make sure you eat some food, move your body, take care of yourselves, stay regulated, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.